This is Jenny Kunkel, and in this video we are going to download both SQL Server Management Studio and Data Azure Studio. They are both available for the Windows platform. On the Mac OS side, only Data Azure Studio is available. We're going to try to work with both of these products in class, so everybody gets a little bit of exposure to the SQL Server Management Studio, which has a little bit additional capabilities than Data Azure Studio, but we will be spending a lot of time in Data Azure Studio as well. We want to get skills in both of these tools. We will also be connecting our container databases to SQL Server Management Studio and Data Azure Studio. After we set up the connections, we're going to run in the NorthWinds database, and then we're going to restore the AdventureWorks, and we're going to use the 2019 backup to do the restoration. There is a little bit of an anomaly with the 2022 version. It works perfectly acceptable for the local install of SQL Server, but for a container it doesn't work so well. So let's go ahead and let's get started with installing SQL Server Management Studio. If you do a search using a search engine on Download SQL Server Management Studio, if you're using Google, the very first entry that shows up is the learn.microsoft.com site. If you drill into that link, it's going to allow you to download the SQL Server Management Studio, and this is going to be 20.2. If you click on this link, it's going to start the download process. I've already gone ahead and done the download to try to speed things up. We can go ahead and double click on this, hit the install. It's going to give a user account control dialog that indicates that this is Microsoft Corporation and asking if you want to make changes to your computer, and it's going to start the installation process. And at this point, we have everything installed. We can close. We want to go ahead and switch back to our browser. The next thing we want to use a search engine to locate is the Azure Data Studio. If you search by terms, download Azure Data Studio, the very first instance should provide a learn.microsoft.com link. If you scroll down, you should see a table of things to download, and in this case we are a Windows. We're going to use the user installer. If you want to download the zip file, you can. I've already gone ahead and done the download of the 64-bit, so I'm going to switch over and run the installer. Go through and read the license terms. I'm going to go ahead and accept. Pretty much going to accept the defaults, except I do want to create a desktop icon. Go ahead and install. Leave it as Launch Azure Data Studio, because then we'll be set up to continue with our next activity. So we're just going to hit Finish and make this full size. When I come up, I'll have no connections. Before I really get started with anything, I want to go through and look at my settings. There is one particular parameter I need to set, and I want to get into my settings. And once I'm in my settings, I'm going to search for Enable Preview Feature. I want to ensure that I have my Workbench Enable Preview Features checked. Once I have ensured that that's the case, if it's not checked, go ahead and check it. I'm going to close my settings. And then I need to go ahead and create my connection to my container. I can do that by clicking on the button. It's going to take me down, ask me what type of connection. It is going to be a Microsoft SQL Server. Our server is going to be localhost, comma, and then we need to go look in our Docker configuration to see what is the port that has been exposed, and that's 15433. I'm going to copy that value and place it after I'm going to switch from Windows authentication to SQL login, specify the SA account. I'm going to go back to my Docker configuration, and in my env file, I have my password that I'm going to use. I'm going to add that. This is going to be the default. I want to have mandatory. I also want to change the trust server certificate to true. And then my server group is also going to be default. And at that point, I can connect. I should be able to expand and see the system databases that are already there. That is our first step. We want to go ahead and download the NorthWinds database, and I have this GitHub location where they have the sample databases for the Microsoft SQL Server NorthWinds and Pubs databases. We're only going to be dealing with the NorthWinds. We just want to go ahead and download the second instance, not the one that says Azure SQL database. We're not working in Azure. We have the Azure Data Studio, but our database is not sitting in Azure. It's actually in our Docker container. Therefore, we want to download the second one. If we click on it, it's going to take us into the SQL file. We can go ahead and download it. I've already got it downloaded, so I'm not going to do that. You would just click on this to download that SQL file. Then after we do that, we would want to go to the learn.microsoft.com site to download the AdventureWorks sample databases backup. If we go down halfway through the page, we have the section that has a chart of all the different versions of the backup. We want to download the OLTP. This is going to be the online transaction processing workload. We're going to take the AdventureWorks 2019 backup and download that. So if you go ahead and click on that, it's going to take you through the download process for that. Again, I've already got that downloaded. Before we do our backup, we need to change some permissions on the var opt SQL Server directory. We could always go into our container and do that, but we also need to be able to copy a file from our computer into the container, and we can do that with a Docker command. So we're going to do all three with Docker commands. We're going to bring up a PowerShell window in order to do this. Run this as administrator. It's going to give us the user account control. We'll just say yes to bring up the window. The very first thing we need to do here in the window is to get our container ID, and I can do that using a Docker container ls, and that's going to give us our container ID. That's going to be something that we need to use in each one of our commands that we execute. And we are going to start with a Docker command that's going to execute. So we use the exec. This is -it. We're going to specify -u parameter. That's going to be for the user. That's going to be our root. We're going to copy in our container ID, paste it into the command line, space, then going to add bin/bash space -c, use a single quote, and then we're going to use the chown, so that's change owner, -R, so do it recursively on that directory. The user is going to be mssql. We're going to specify the actual directory in the container, which is the var opt SQL server directory. Put our ending quote in and hit enter. Now we should be able to do an up arrow and just go in and change from the chown to group, and then just get rid of the ending own there. And we should be able to hit enter again. So that's going to change the group to mssql2. So the owner and the group on that directory should now be mssql, which is what we need to have for us to be able to apply that AdventureWorks restoration. Now I'm going to bring up File Explorer and drill into the directory location where I have my backup file. make this smaller. I'm going to go ahead and be able to copy this value in when I need to execute the command. I'm going to add my Docker. This is going to be using a copy, so CP. This is going to be my file location on my current computer. And this is going to be then RVC, so I'm basically just going to copy this location here. Then I want to put in my file names, so I'm going to just go ahead and rename it. It'll give me the AdventureWorks, and I can just put in the extension .bak, put in my double quotes, copy in my container ID, paste it in, back up, put a colon after the container ID with the /var opt SQL server. So that's the directory that we changed ownership on. And then we want to go ahead and change to the backup directory underneath that, and then paste in our file name again. So I'm going to copy that. And that's going to be BAK, and hit enter. Now we have copied that in. We can always go back to our Docker desktop. If we go into our SQL Server terminal window, look at where we're at, go to our var opt SQL Server directory, and into the backup. Notice that they are owned by mssql, so we were able to change that. If we do an ls-l, we have our AdventureWorks 2019 backup that we just copied in there. Now we want to switch back to Azure Data Studio. Once we are in there, we want to click on our master, right-click, bring up a new query window. Make sure that you're seeing the master database. Once we see that, we can go up to the search bar, go to the show and run commands, type in restore to locate that command, click on it, and it should bring up a window for us. We are going to restore from a backup file, so we want to change that option. And then we want to click on the 3 dots to locate our backup file path. And as we scroll down, we should see the var opt SQL Server backup directory that is expanded. Click on the AdventureWorks 2019 backup and say OK. When it comes up, let's go ahead and click on the checkbox before that information to restore it, and then go ahead and hit the restore button. And it should restore the AdventureWorks 2019 database. Once we have done that, we can expand the AdventureWorks, and we can see that we have a whole lot of tables. We have different schemas that are being used. We have tables in the DBO schema, in the human resources schema, the person schema, the production schema, the purchasing, sales schema, lots of different things that we can work with this semester. And we'll get into what a schema is in more detail so that you'll understand that later. Now that we've got that one completed, let's go ahead and work on getting our NorthWinds set up. Let's go ahead and click on the database. We should have a plus sign. We can click on the plus sign. It's going to bring up a window over here. We're going to add the name of the database. So this is going to be NorthWinds. And just go ahead and create it. We should see that the database is there. But if we look, it doesn't have any tables yet. And we need to work on getting that populated. So now that we are in our NorthWinds database, so let's make sure that we switch over to NorthWinds when we get the file loaded. So we want to do File, Open File, navigate to the location where we have the file downloaded on our computer. Select the SQL file, go ahead and open it up. We don't have a database selected. It's not showing us the option to do that. So when we have that kind of connection issue, we can always try to reopen it. Typically, it will resolve itself. And now we can change that to be our NorthWinds database. Once we have that done, then we can go ahead and run the file. We can see that it's going through and it's doing all different kinds of things here. If we go back and try to expand our NorthWinds, we're going to have to refresh it. And we can see that we now have tables here. And with this, we can always do a select of the top 1,000. And as you can see here, it's giving us some test results. So we can do that on any of the tables if we want to just kind of poke around and look at any of the data. So at this point, we have our Data Azure Studio all set up. And we want to switch over and start up SQL Server Management Studio and get our connection set there. To do this, if I go to the search, I can do an SSMS and it should bring up SQL Server Management Studio. I can go ahead and open it up. And I'm going to say do not import. And I'm going to change this. I need to browse for more. Or I can just enter something here. So I can type in, let's get rid of this, localhost, 15433. That's the port that we saw in our Docker file. We can change this to SQL Server Authentication. This is going to be SA. I still need to copy in that password. I'm going to remember the password. I'm going to go ahead and check the trust server certificate and connect. Now if I expand this, I should see that I have the schema that I ran in through Azure Data Studio already set up. One of the things that I want to do before I shut down my Azure Data Studio is ensure that I have my password saved. I don't believe I went through and did that. I can always come in here, right click, and edit my connection. And I must have done it. If I didn't have it saved, then I could go ahead and do that and set my password to save it for future reference. So that is the walkthrough of setting up your Azure Data Studio and also your SQL Server Management Studio.